When we gather in the atmosphere of silence, something begins to stir beneath the surface of our conscious minds. The air itself seems charged with expectancy, as if the unconscious wishes to be heard through the stillness. Tonight I want to speak to you about a paradox that has haunted the human soul for centuries. That everything finds the one who has finally ceased to want. It is a paradox that touches most profoundly those who have lived their lives as empaths, those who absorb the pain of others as though it were their own, who confuse compassion with possession, and who wander the corridors of human suffering, believing it is their task to carry the world's wounds. But what if the very act of relinquishing desire, of no longer striving to be everything to everyone, is the mysterious threshold where the unconscious opens the gate and life begins to bring to you all that was once withheld? What if, in the moment you want nothing, everything comes? The empath, you see, is not merely a gentle personality type or poetic temperament. The empath is an archetypal pattern, an image that arises from the collective unconscious of humanity. To be an empath is to be inhabited by a primordial figure, the wounded healer, the one who knows by suffering what others cannot yet bear to feel. This archetype has existed in all mythologies. Chiron, the centaur, wounded yet immortal, offering wisdom born of pain, the Christ figure, carrying the cross not merely as an individual man, but as the weight of humanity's darkness. When such an archetype seizes a person, they become porous to life itself. They dream the dreams of others. They feel the hidden despair behind a smile. They sense betrayal before it is confessed. And because of this permeability, they are often lost in a flood of impressions that do not belong to them. They become a house where too many guests dwell. A temple where the boundaries between the self and the other dissolve. But let us pause here and consider the meaning of desire. Desire is the spark that awakens the ego, the striving force of life, the reaching beyond the immediate toward the possible. Yet desire is also a chain binding the self to illusions of control. The empath desires desperately to heal, to fix, to rescue. And this desire is often not conscious choice, but compulsion. It rises from the shadow, the unhealed wound within them that mirrors the very wound they see in others. The empath runs to save, because in saving the other, they are unconsciously trying to save the abandoned child within themselves. But this saving never succeeds, because it is not rooted in freedom, but in bondage, and the world responds in kind. As long as you desire, you are enslaved to what you want. The very thing you chase flees from you, because your pursuit declares to the universe, I do not yet have. You live in scarcity, and scarcity multiplies itself. Now, imagine then the strange alchemy that occurs when the empath comes to the end of themselves, when the wounds are confronted, when the inner child is embraced, when the shadow is no longer projected but integrated. In that moment, desire is loosened. The empath begins to want nothing, not out of despair, not out of bitterness, but out of fullness. They discover that the compulsion to heal the world was born from their refusal to sit with their own pain. And once they accept their own suffering as teacher, they are no longer driven to compulsively absorb what does not belong to them. They begin to dwell in a stillness that is not indifference, but presence, and in that stillness, life begins to come to them unbidden. Everything finds the empath, who finally wants nothing. Do you see the paradox? It is the reversal of ego's logic. The ego says, if I do not pursue, if I do not crave, I will have nothing. But the unconscious says, only when you cease your craving will you be open to receive. The alchemists spoke of this in their mysterious symbols. The vessel must be emptied in order to be filled. The lead must die before the gold is born. The empath's life is a crucible for this transformation. As long as they cling to their compulsions, they remain lead-heavy, burdened, filled with toxins, not their own. But when they let go, when they want nothing, they become the empty vessel into which the self, the archetype of wholeness, pour sie riche, they cease to be merely empaths and become whole human beings. They are no longer defined by the archetype, but integrated into a greater totality, and now everything, the love, the opportunity, the vision, the abundance finds them because they have become aligned with a deeper rhythm of life. I remember a dream recounted to me by a patient. She dreamed she was walking through a forest, carrying countless children upon her back. Each child cried, and she struggled to soothe them, but the weight grew unbearable. At last she collapsed. In that moment of collapse, the children vanished, and she was left lying on the earth, alone. Then a great tree bent down its branches and covered her with shade. From the sky, light descended, filling her body with warmth. She awoke weeping, for she understood the children were not hers to carry. They were images of her endless desire to heal others, her refusal to let the world suffer. Only when she collapsed, when she surrendered, could she experience the grace of being held not by the burdens of others, but by the greater self, symbolized in the tree and the light. Everything found her only when she desired nothing. This dream, I told her, was not merely personal, but universal, an image rising from the collective unconscious to teach her the archetypal law. Relinquishment is the gate of abundance. We must also confront the shadow side of empathy, for empathy is not always love. Often it is disguised control. To feel for another can become a way of binding them, of saying, your suffering cannot exist unless I am present to absorb it. This is an unconscious inflation of the ego, clothed in compassion, but secretly rooted in pride. To let go of this pride, to want nothing, even of the suffering of others, is to free both oneself and the other. For each soul must carry its own cross. No one can carry it for them. The empath who wants nothing has learned to stand before another in silence, to witness their pain without needing to dissolve it, to allow the mystery of their journey to unfold without intrusion. This is not detachment, but respect for the autonomy of the soul, and paradoxically, when such respect is present, healing flows far more deeply than when one rushes in to rescue. The silent presence of one who wants nothing becomes the vessel through which grace itself enters. Let us consider this in terms of archetypes. The empath is seized by the archetype of the healer, but every archetype has its shadow. The shadow of the healer is the savior complex, the desire to redeem others to avoid facing one's own wounds. When the empath has not yet faced their shadow, they are possessed by the archetype. They do not live it consciously. It lives them, but individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires that we integrate the archetype rather than be ruled by it. The empath who wants nothing is the one who has integrated the archetype. They can heal without compulsion, love without enslavement, give without depletion. They can walk away without guilt, and they can remain without pride. This is the fruit of individuation, freedom from possession by unconscious forces. And freedom always attracts. The free soul is magnetic. The one who needs nothing, paradoxically, receives everything, for they radiate wholeness, and wholeness calls forth the fullness of life. There is another dream I recall, one that speaks to this mystery. A man dreamed he stood at a vast marketplace, surrounded by stalls, overflowing with treasures. But every time he reached for something, it turned to dust in his hands. Exhausted, he sat down and said, "I will want nothing." At that moment, the ground beneath him opened, and from the depths rose a fountain of water that quenched his thirst and bathed his body. He awoke with a deep sense of peace. This dream reveals the same paradox. As long as we grasp outwardly, the treasures decay, but when we relinquish, the treasure rises from within. The empath's gift is not found in the marketplace of the world, but in the fountain of the self, and the self reveals itself when we finally want nothing. You must understand that to want nothing is not nihilism. It is not a void of despair. It is the fullness of being. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, he was not pursuing enlightenment as an object to be seized. He surrendered, and in that surrender, enlightenment found him. The same is true in the Christian mystics, who speak of the poverty of spirit, the blessedness of those who no longer cling to possessions of the heart. It is the same truth, repeated across cultures, across centuries. Only in wanting nothing can you receive all. And for the empath, this is the liberation they long for but cannot yet name. The empath who finally wants nothing is no longer a victim of projection. They no longer mirror unconsciously the wounds of those around them. Instead, they become a mirror of the self. When others look into their eyes, they glimpse not dependency but freedom. They sense not depletion but abundance. And so they are drawn not to consume but to awaken. The empath becomes a living symbol, an image of wholeness in a fractured world. This is why everything finds them, because they have become a center, a magnet, a mandala. The unconscious recognizes in them an image of the self, and life itself converges upon them, not as burden, but as blessing. The journey into the state of wanting nothing is not a linear ascent, but rather a descent, a katabasis, into the underworld of one's own psyche. Every empath who has reached the place of relinquishment has first been shattered. For to want nothing, you must first see the futility of wanting. You must first experience the exhaustion of chasing shadows, the heartbreak of pouring yourself into others who do not know how to hold you, the despair of realizing that no matter how much you give, it will never be enough to heal the world. This despair is not a mistake. It is an initiation. It is the descent of Inanna into the underworld, where every layer of ornament is stripped away until she stands naked before the throne of death. Only then can resurrection come. The empath's collapse is not the end, but the passage. Without it, they would remain in the endless cycle of projection and depletion, but through it, they discover the strange wisdom of the self, that true life begins only after death to desire. There is a peculiar dream motif that often appears in those at this threshold. They dream they are drowning, pulled under by waves, gasping for breath, surrounded by bodies crying out for help, and then, in the moment of surrender, they cease struggling. Suddenly they realize they can breathe underwater, the panic dissolves, and in its place arises an uncanny calm. The ocean itself, once enemy, becomes womb. This is an archetypal image of transformation. The ocean is the collective unconscious, vast, overwhelming, filled with voices not your own. The empath struggles because they believe they must rescue, must surface, must keep control. But when they relinquish, when they want nothing, not even survival, they discover they can live in the depths. They are not destroyed by the unconscious. They are sustained by it. This is the psychic birth into a new mode of being. Now imagine such a soul walking in the world. They no longer radiate the frantic hunger to heal. Their gaze does not clutch at you with expectation. They do not drown in your projections, nor do they rush to absorb your pain. They stand still, rooted like an ancient oak tree, and strangely, everyone is drawn to them. The anxious find calm in their presence. The broken feel seen without being devoured. The lost sense the path without needing to be told. This is what it means that everything finds the empath who wants nothing. They have become a living symbol of the self, and symbols attract. People come not because they are chaste, but because the magnetism of wholeness calls forth the unconscious longing in every soul. But beware, the ego will attempt to counterfeit this state. It will say, I want nothing, while secretly desiring recognition for wanting nothing. This too is compulsion. The true wanting, nothing cannot be performed, cannot be declared as a badge. It is discovered in silence, often when no one is watching. It is like a flame that appears after all other lights have gone out. The mystics have called it the dark night of the soul. Jung saw it as the confrontation with the shadow and the integration of the opposites. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be bypassed. The empath must face their own secret need to be needed, must look into the abyss of their pride disguised as compassion. Only when this is burned away in the fire of honesty does the authentic nothingness arise, not nihilistic emptiness, but fullness without demand. Consider also how this paradox mirrors the archetype of the trickster. The trickster in myth always reverses expectations. He wins by losing, gains by letting go, speaks truth through folly. Life itself often wears the mask of trickster. The empath believes that wanting to heal will bring them closeness, but instead it breeds distance. They believe that absorbing suffering will bring them love, but instead it creates exploitation. Only when they relinquish desire, when they say, I will carry no more, does life suddenly bring them intimacy, love, and abundance. It is as if the unconscious, amused by their struggle, waits until they give up and then rewards them with everything they thought they had lost. This is not cruelty, but pedagogy. The unconscious teaches in paradox, because paradox is the language that breaks the tyranny of the ego. One might ask, why does everything find the one who wants nothing? The answer lies in energy. Désir radiate tension. It creates a field of need that pushes away what it seeks. To want is to announce incompleteness, and incompleteness repels. But the soul that wants nothing radiates coherence. It is no longer broadcasting lack, but presence. Presence is irresistible. It is why people gather round the enlightened, without knowing why. It is why the monk in silence alters the atmosphere of an entire village. The empath who wants nothing has become such a presence. They do not chase, yet all things gravitate toward them. For they have aligned with the archetype of the self, the center of the psyche, the axis mundi, and all psyches, whether conscious or not, recognize this center and are drawn to it. There is a man I once worked with who embodied this truth. For decades, he had been a rescuer, always entangled in relationships with those who drained him. He believed his worth depended on his ability to save, but life broke him betrayal, collapse, the loss of everything he clung to. In despair, he entered analysis. For months he wept, not about others, but about the child within him who had never been protected. Slowly he began to see that his endless giving was a defense against his own unhealed wound. And then one day, after a long silence in a session, he said, I want nothing. It was not bitterness but clarity. From that moment, everything shifted. His relationships changed. People sought him not for rescue, but for truth. Opportunities he had chased for years now arrived at his door unbidden. He lived no longer as an empath possessed by compulsion, but as a man who had integrated the archetype. He was free, and in freedom, everything found him. Freedom is the essence of individuation. To individuate is to become whole, not enslaved by unconscious patterns. The empath who wants nothing has individuated. They can feel without drowning, give without losing, love without fear. They stand at the still point, the mandala's center, where opposites reconcile. They embody the union of compassion and detachment, of presence and autonomy, of love and freedom. And because they embody wholeness, life itself gathers around them. The unconscious knows, here is one who has completed the circle, and so it pours into them what it withholds from those who still chase in desperation. Think of it as the turning of the seasons. Spring does not beg to arrive. Summer does not plead for recognition. Autumn does not cling to the leaves. Winter does not chase the sun. Each simply is. And because of this, the cycle continues. Life flourishes. The empath who wants nothing has become like the seasons. They live in rhythm, not in compulsion, and rhythm, not désir, is what sustains life. To align with rhythm is to invite abundance, for abundance is not a prize to be seized, but a tide to be entered. Everything finds the one who lives in rhythm, who wants nothing, because they are no longer resisting the current of life. Now, some may hear this and fear that to want nothing is to lose passion, to become passive, to drift into indifference. But this is a misunderstanding. To want nothing is not to cease caring. It is to cease clinging. Passion remains, but it is no longer frantic. It is serene. Love remains, but it is no longer enslaved to outcome. It is free. Creativity remains, but it flows without obsession. It is play. The empath who wants nothing still loves, still creates, still gives, but their actions arise from fullness, not lack. They are like the sun, which shines without demanding repayment, which radiates without depletion. Such a soul does not withdraw from life, but finally enters it fully. Without chains, you, too, must ask yourself, what is it you are still wanting? Do you want to be needed, to be loved, to be recognized, to be indispensable? These desires are not evil, but they are traps. They bind you to patterns that drain your soul. What would happen if you dared to release them, to stand before the world and say, I want nothing? What fear arises in you at that thought, that you will be abandoned, forgotten, irrelevant? This fear is the gatekeeper. Behind it lies the freedom you long for. For when you want nothing, you will not be abandoned. You will finally belong to yourself. You will not be forgotten. You will be remembered by life itself. You will not be irrelevant. You will radiate a presence beyond all recognition. And then everything you once chased will come, not as prize, but as natural outflow of your wholeness. When we speak of wanting nothing, we are entering into the very mystery of the self. The self, as I have often described, is the archetype of wholeness, the God image in the psyche, the center that holds together the fragments of our being. It is not the ego's possession, but the ego's guide, appearing in dreams, myths, and symbols as the divine child, the mandala, the wise old man, the eternal feminine. When the empath releases their compulsions, they step aside and make room for the self to act. To want nothing is to give sovereignty to the self, to cease trying to bend life to ego's will, and instead to dwell in the center where opposites unite. And in this surrender, everything arrives, not because it is chased, but because the self already holds the fullness of life. The empath who wants nothing has become transparent to this center, and so abundance flows through them effortlessly. Yet the path to such transparency is a labyrinth. The empath's sensitivity is both gift and curse. It is as though their psychic skin is thinner than most, allowing impressions to enter deeply, leaving wounds that never fully close. In childhood, this sensitivity often arises in environments of chaos or neglect. The child learns to attune to the moods of others as a survival strategy, sensing the unspoken rage, the unacknowledged grief, the hidden danger. This attunement becomes identity. I feel, therefore I am safe. But safety bought at the price of self-erasure is not true safety. It is bondage. The adult empath continues the pattern, confusing love with absorption, believing they must lose themselves to preserve connection. Thus they want desperately, though they do not realize it. They want the other to be healed so they themselves may feel secure. They want love to be returned in proportion to what they give. They want validation for their endless sacrifice. But the wanting never ends, and so they remain enslaved. The unconscious, however, never leaves the soul in bondage without offering the symbols of release. Dreams of empty rooms, of barren deserts, of laying down heavy loads. These are the psyche's whispers that fullness can only come through emptiness. One woman told me she dreamed of carrying a golden chalice, filling it again and again with wine, offering it to crowds who drank without gratitude. Exhausted, she threw the chalice into a river. To her astonishment, the river turned to wine, and the people knelt to drink, no longer from her hand but from the source itself. This dream revealed her truth. She was not meant to be the endless vessel of others' thirst. The river, the self, was always there. By relinquishing the chalice, she discovered the abundance that did not depend on her sacrifice. This is the meaning of wanting nothing. It is to return the chalice to the river, to trust that the source will provide. You must see how radical this is. Our entire culture worships desire. Advertising, politics, religion all whisper the same lie, that you must want more. That fulfillment lies in the next possession, the next approval, the next relationship. To want nothing is to rebel against this spell. It is to step outside the cycle of consumption and become aligned with a deeper order. This is why those who want nothing appear threatening to the world. They cannot be manipulated. They cannot be seduced by promises of power or love or recognition. They are free. And freedom is always magnetic. The empath who wants nothing becomes a mirror in which others see their own enslavement, and though it may frighten them, it also draws them irresistibly, for the soul longs for freedom. Even when the ego resists, we may also approach this paradox through alchemy, the great symbolic science of transformation. The alchemist spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, where all is dissolved into chaos, where desire collapses into despair. From this darkness arises the albedo, the whitening, where the soul is purified, desires burned away until only essence remains. Finally comes the rubedo, the reddening, the fullness of life, the integration of opposites, the philosopher's stone. The empath's journey follows this pattern. First, they descend into the nigredo, overwhelmed by the suffering of others, consumed by endless desire to heal. Then comes the albedo, the collapse, the moment of wanting nothing, and finally, the rubedo. Everything finds them, not because they chase it, but because they have become gold, the substance that attracts without striving. This is not metaphor alone, it is the psyche's way of describing inner transformation through symbolic images. The alchemists lived these truths in their furnaces. We live them in our souls. There is a silence that comes with wanting nothing, and it is not the silence of emptiness, but of presence. In this silence, the empath discovers they are not defined by what they give or take. They exist, and existence is enough. From this silence arises a new capacity, the ability to listen without needing to respond, to see without needing to fix, to love without needing to own. Such silence is more healing than all words, for in it, the other is free to encounter themselves. The empath who has reached this silence becomes a sanctuary. They no longer radiate the noise of desire, and so others find in them the space to breathe. This is why everything finds them, not because they pursue, but because they have become the place where life itself feels at home. I recall a man who dreamed of sitting in a cathedral. He had always been the one to rush through the aisles, lighting candles for others, whispering prayers on their behalf, never resting. But in the dream, he sat motionless in the pew, hands empty, head bowed, and then, one by one, people entered the cathedral, sitting beside him in silence, until the entire church was filled. They came not because he called, but because he was still. The dream revealed the mystery. His silence, his emptiness, had become the magnet. This is the paradox of the empath who wants nothing. Their stillness calls forth more than their striving ever could. Now let us consider the shadow again, for it is always near. To want nothing can be twisted by the ego into withdrawal, into bitterness, into cynicism that says, I do not care. This is not the true wanting nothing. This is the wounded child, refusing to hope. The ego, hiding from disappointment. The true wanting nothing is not collapse into indifference, but expansion into presence. It is not the death of love, but the purification of it. How do we discern the difference? By the fruit it bears, cynicism isolates, but true emptiness attracts. Bitterness closes the heart, but true nothingness opens it wider than ever before. Indifference numbs, but true surrender awakens. If you feel dead, you are still in the shadow. If you feel alive and free, you have touched the self. The empath who arrives here is transformed even in their relationships. No longer do they cling to those who drain them. No longer do they fear abandonment. They know that what is real will remain, and what leaves was never theirs to hold. They can walk into solitude without fear, and from solitude they radiate a presence that calls forth authentic connection. Love now finds them, not as hunger, but as gift. Work finds them, not as slavery, but as calling. Joy finds them, not as fleeting pleasure, but as abiding presence. This is the meaning of everything finding the one who wants nothing. Life itself, relieved of the burden of their frantic desire, rushes in to fill the open space. And so I tell you, do not fear the collapse, do not fear the emptiness. It is the threshold. When you finally say, I want nothing, you have entered the cathedral of the self. You have become the vessel into which the fullness of life pours. You have ceased to chase, and so you are found. You have ceased to desire, and so you receive. This is the paradox at the heart of the empath transformation, and it is the paradox at the heart of every soul's individuation. There comes a moment when the empath who has surrendered all compulsions begins to radiate a new kind of light. It is not the blazing light of ambition, nor the flickering flame of need, but a steady glow born of union with the deeper self. This light does not announce itself, yet it is felt by all who approach. People sense it without understanding. Animals respond to it instinctively. Even the natural world seems to bend toward it in harmony. This is because the one who wants nothing has aligned their personal rhythm with the archetypal rhythm of life itself. They have ceased to fight the current, and in doing so, they have become the current. Everything finds them because they have become the place where everything belongs. We might describe this transformation as a shift from persona to essence. The persona, that mask we wear for the world, is built on desire. The desire to be seen, to be approved, to be useful. The empath's persona is often the mask of the healer, the giver, the indispensable one. But masks always tire the soul, for they are performances that conceal as much as they reveal. When the empath wants nothing, the mask falls away. What remains is essence raw, unvarnished being, and essence is magnetic, for it resonates with the archetypal truth in all of us. People recognize essence, even if they cannot name it. They feel it as authenticity, as freedom, as a depth that cannot be manipulated. This is why everything finds the empath at this stage, because essence calls to essence. But this path is not without its solitude, for when you want nothing, you also lose the false bonds that were tied by desire. Many will not understand. Those who depended on your endless giving may drift away. Those who thrived on your compulsion may resent your freedom. And yet, in this solitude, you discover companionship of a deeper kind. Dreams bring you symbols of wholeness, circles, mandalas, flowing rivers. Synchronicities arise, moments in which outer events mirror inner truths, reminding you that you are not abandoned, but woven into a greater order. This solitude is not loneliness, but initiation, preparing you to carry the weight of your own light. Everything finds you not in the crowd's noise, but in the silence of your own being. I once knew a woman who, after decades of draining relationships, withdrew into a simple life. She planted a garden, walked each morning by the river, wrote her thoughts in silence. Friends accused her of selfishness, of withdrawing from the world she once served. But as months passed, people began to come to her neighbors, strangers, even children drawn not by her effort, but by her presence. They sat with her in the garden, not asking for solutions, but simply to share the stillness. She told me, "I want nothing, and yet they come." She had become what Jung might call a symbol incarnate, a living expression of the self, and life, recognizing its own image in her, poured itself toward her. This is the destiny of the empath who wants nothing, to become a sanctuary in which the world can rest. In myth we see this same pattern. The Grail is not found by those who seek it desperately, but by the one who surrenders all ambition and asks the right question. The kingdom is healed not by conquest, but by compassion without demand. The bodhisattva remains not because they must, but because they want nothing for themselves. These are not stories of deprivation, but of fullness. They remind us that abundance comes when desire is released, that healing flows where compulsion ceases. The empath who wants nothing has stepped into this archetypal current. They live not as isolated individuals, but as participants in a myth that belongs to all humanity. And in this participation, everything finds them, because they have become part of the eternal story. You may wonder, then, what this means for your own life. Perhaps you recognize yourself in the empath's exhaustion, in the endless giving that leaves you hollow, in the craving for love that never arrives as you imagined. The first step is not to abolish desire by force, but to see it clearly. Notice when your giving is compulsion, when your compassion hides control, when your sacrifice is bargaining for love. To see is already to loosen the chain. Then allow the collapse. Do not fear the moment when your strength fails, when the children of your dreams vanish, when the chalice falls into the river. This collapse is the gateway. It is the moment the unconscious has been preparing you for. And when you stand in the ruins and whisper, "I want nothing," you will find that the ruins are not empty but fertile ground. Life will begin to sprout in ways you could not have planned, could not have forced. This is the mystery. You will be found. For the empath, this surrender does not erase their gift. They still feel, still perceive, still love, but the gift is transfigured. No longer is it a wound that bleeds endlessly. It becomes a spring that flows without depletion. They give without losing themselves, for they give from wholeness, not hunger. They love without chains, for their love is not bargaining but blessing. They walk into the world not as saviors but as companions, witnesses, symbols of the self, and everything finds them opportunity. Love, meaning not because they chase, but because they radiate the completeness the world itself longs for. This is why I say the empath who wants nothing has discovered the deepest secret of individuation. They have passed through shadow, integrated archetype, surrendered desire, and emerged as whole. They are not perfect, but they are free. And freedom is the magnet of the soul. If you wish for everything to find you, begin not by chasing, but by letting go. Sit in the silence, face your shadow, release your compulsions, dare to want nothing, and in that daring, you will discover the fullness you have sought all your life. Remember always, the unconscious waits for your surrender. The self cannot be seized, it can only be received, and it is received in the moment you cease striving, the moment you say, with the courage of one who has faced the abyss, "I want nothing." Then, and only then, will you know the paradox is true. Everything finds the empath who finally wants nothing.